The story of Lumukanda, a summary. The strange ones were feasting and there was food and drink in abundance for all, when suddenly an idea sprang up for their entertainment and amusement. As the bloodthirsty group they were, it had been their custom to entertain and amuse themselves by making their slaves sword fight till one of them died. Bets would be made of which slave would win, and the master of the winning slave always was well pleased. On this day, however, a new form of amusement arose when Lumukanda's master called him in to sword fight with a tall, strong, and experienced female slave. Both the slaves were covered in battle armor, and their helmets covered their whole face, save small holes for their eyes, nose, and mouth. Though uncomfortable as this was for Lumukanda to fight with a female slave, this master or his master added pressure by stating that he either has to kill the slave or lose his own life. It appeared that the bet between the master of Lumukanda and the female slave meant that if the female slave won, then her master would need to yield herself for 10 days for Lumukanda's master's sexual pleasure. Naturally, the pressure was placed high for these slaves to win the sword fight, and great anticipation lied on who would be killed and lose the fight. The fight between the two slaves was very heated, and both wounded the other quite badly. But in the end, Lumukanda struck the breast of the female slave so bad that she cried, and he quickly followed with a strike on her chest to seal her death. With only a few moments left of the female slave's life, Lumukanda removed her helmet to hand it over to his master as token of his victory. To his greatest dismay and pain, he then realized that he had been sword fighting and has now killed her mother, and from his birthmark that became revealed, his mother also identified him as his son, and Lumukanda cried heavily. The separation had happened when Lumukanda was very young, and for years they had been kept as slaves apart, and were now meeting in such a treacherous way. His mother's last words to him were words of encouragement that he needs to be strong and not blame himself, as it was either he killed his mother or that his mother killed him. His mother shared that she is happy to have not been the one to kill her son. Lumukanda, on the other hand, was deeply affected by this and harbored deep regret for having killed his own mother. This killing ended the gathering in the hall, and all left to their own abodes. Lumukanda and his friend Lubo and Odu, the senior slave, went to bury his mother, and on their way back from burying her, they witnessed someone thrown from a high building and landing on a rock which sealed his instant death. Soon sirens were heard, and search began for a certain suspicious figure who had been running and who seemingly was behind the death of the person they just witnessed. Lubo recognized the fallen strange one to be the male wife of the High Emperor Karesu. These slaves then immediately knew that trouble would follow and hurried to the stalls where they stayed. Evidently, a chase and search ensued, and squads of fully armed soldiers soon surrounded the area in pursuit of the heavily running strange one suspected to be behind the killing. Lumukanda and his two fellow slaves saw the wanted strange one and worked their way to approach nearer with the intention to seize him. They understood fully that failing to report such a fugitive will cost them their lives, so they sought him very intently. Lumukanda reached first and was shocked to overhear a conversation between the fugitive and his master, particularly how his master addressed this fugitive as Your Highness. Furthermore, the three slaves heard the sound of three voices, which they identified as Lumukanda's master, the master's son, and the mistress who had been master of Lumukanda's mother. After overhearing sword fighting, screams, breaking of furniture, and such noises, they heard, You have killed your son, screamed by the mistress. And from this heated argument, they also learned that Lumukanda's master also intended to kill the emperor and was hiding the fugitive in his home. Shortly after, the slaves were instructed to clean the damage and to chase and kill the mistress. They chased and killed the mistress who had been Lumukanda's mother's slave. To this, Lubo remarked that Lumukanda's mother's death was well avenged, as they have now killed the mistress who orchestrated her death. Later, amid Lumukanda's fellow 19 male slaves and 16 female slaves, discussion ensued to encourage Lumukanda, who clearly was still affected by having killed his own mother. Luluma, a female slave, comforted him by sharing that he should not be blaming himself for the act, in the same way that a toy can never be held responsible for what the child, its owner, makes it to do. In anger, Lumukanda cursed the existence of any god or gods by highlighting how horrible the treatment they continued to receive and how the presence of a god or any gods would have meant their rescue from such oppression. Luma warned Lumukanda against such blasphemy. When called to present themselves in obedience before their master, as was the daily custom for slaves, these slaves found their master with 2 younger concubines and another who looked like a mixed daughter of a strange one and a black woman. Looking at her apparel, her bands, her eyes, and remembering that this was the same woman, the fugitive who had climbed over the garden wall the night before, Lumukanda soon realized that this woman was a sorceress, the feared witch Makira Kadesi, who was also the opponent of the emperor Karesu. When it was Lumukanda's turn to present himself before their master, all were shocked when suddenly the sorceress ordered that he be killed, as he was destined to be the dark destroyer of their empire. The sorceress confirmed her claim by sharing that the dark destroyer, which the gods showed, is said to have the birthmark which Lumukanda has on his chest. Though his master preferred otherwise, he was overpowered by the sorceress's words, and soon a troop was headed to the river, wherein Lumukanda was thrown in bound and left to drown to death. Lumukanda, however, survived this ordeal and soon was out on shore. In his state of delusion, grief, and madness, he kept seeing his dead mother and seeked to ask forgiveness from her and to receive an embrace from her, only to discover that he was embracing trees in the forest and that his mother was indeed no more. He even felt like there was something following him, voices speaking in his head, and that someone was playing a voodoo trick on him. He ran from thoughts of regret and blame in his own mind, and he ultimately reached a cave where he slept heavily. The following day, he awoke and started scouting his environment and searching for something to eat. He ate 2 raw frogs and returned to continue sleeping. This next time, when he awoke from sleeping, he continued searching his environment and even set traps so he may find something to eat later. From a distance, he noticed a silver figure which fascinated him to approach closer. He concluded it must have been a silver statue left by the strange ones, but upon coming closer to it, he felt a warmth that suggested it was alive, and he saw it looked like a woman with 3 breasts and golden eyes. Feeling uneasy in its presence, Lumukanda began running as fast as he possibly could for a good distance, and when much later he turned back, he saw the silver figure now face towards him and chasing him and fast closing the gap between them. Lumukanda continued running wildly till he heard what seemed like a voodoo voice addressing him. This voice shared that Lumukanda might as well stop running, as he was now in a different world, and that he will be caught anyway. The owner of the voice shared that she is an immortal goddess called Ma, and has chosen to capture Lumukanda as she sees that his life has been full of trouble and that he sees no interest in all that life brings. The goddess Ma shared that this life is vain and that it all always leads to death for all, and that even riches and wealth acquired are meaningless once death strikes. She also shared that she wants to keep Lumukanda as a husband. When Lumukanda called the goddess Ma an unnatural demon, he was reminded of his words, how he had said that gods or demons don't exist in the world. He remembered the conversation he had had with Luluma and the other slaves. The goddess Ma shared that she loved Lumukanda and that she has powers to read minds, and that he wants to connect with humanity through him and wants to make him immortal like she is. Lumukanda ran so wildly that he ultimately fell inside the very trap he had set for his next meal. He intended to stay hidden in this trap for good instead of being with the goddess. The goddess, however, brought a bunch of mamba snakes and threw them in the trap with Lumukanda. Without having planned it, Lumukanda found himself out of the trap much faster than he had fallen into it. Lumukanda was now in continued conversation with the goddess Ma, and she shared that the prophecy of the Dark Destroyer, which the sorcerers had shared of Lumukanda, which also led to him being left to drown in the river, was true, and that Lumukanda would indeed be the one to destroy the empire of the Strange Ones, thus leading to being called the Lost City of Makarikari. Meanwhile, in the city of the Strange Ones, a large feast was taking place in celebration of the new empress, Queen Kadesi, who now was to take over the city. It appeared that the overthrown Emperor Karesu was cruel in his leadership anyway. Empress Kadesi led the gathered crowds in victory songs and appeared to have much influence on the people. She ordered that all her people, with more than 10 slaves, to send half their slaves to work at the mines for metals and to be used for weapons, and gold to be used for trade. In her exuberant spirit of feasting, Kadesi called on Karesu and shared that he had killed her husband and should also die. Kadesi used her dagger to stab him on his belly and also tore his eyes while simultaneously chanting and dancing. Karesu requested to speak, and though he was expected to beg for mercy, his dying words rather left Kadesi desperately wishing he spoke more. Karesu's last words were a calm message from the gods and relayed that the black slave which Kadesi threw in the river and claiming was the Dark Destroyer is not dead but alive and is working his way to destroying the entire empire of Kadesi, and that this slave is already by the lake. Thus Karesu died. Following this message, Kadesi immediately sent for guards and troops to charge towards the river in search of any slave and kill with immediate effect. That night, when Kadesi was alone in the great hall, she continued to ponder deeply and had no intention of sleeping. The candles around her started fading and dying out one by one till only one remained to give light. This last one, however, suddenly shook as if struck by an unseen hand, and then snapped from its holder and fell to the ground. Realizing this a bad omen, Kadesi became gravely afraid, but equally determined to fight for her kingdom. She took to the evil forest wherein resides the evil goddess Watamaraka. She arrived and witnessed a brutal ritual, and though she had been worshipping evil all along, it became deeply overwhelming to be in the physical presence of the evil goddess Watamaraka. Her request to Watamaraka, which was already known to Watamaraka, was for her to protect the empire from destruction by the Dark Destroyer. The price she had to pay for this, however, meant that Kadesi's soul left her body and her body was overtaken by Watamaraka, and that Kadesu's soul resided in the body of Luluma the slave. Watamaraka took good advantage of this and indeed treated Kadesi as the slave she now was. Watamaraka returned to the empire as the Empress Kadesi and continued the plans to use slaves to gain metals and gold from mines. Luluma Kadesi then fled with such great terror and ultimately came across a transformed Lumukanda, a Lumukanda who now could read minds and use mental powers to achieve miraculous powers. Lumukanda immediately recognized her as the slave Luluma, But Luluma Kadesi continued, desperately explaining that she is the empress, but just stuck in the body of Luluma. Goddess Ma came to the rescue to explain everything to Lumukanda and made him realize that Luluma Kadesi was in actual fact the Empress Kadesi. Goddess Ma also shared how the three of them need to unite against Watamaraka so as to save humanity from her ruin. Meanwhile, the city of the Strange Ones was under attack by a large and determined army of black slaves. Many were being killed at this war, and the Strange Ones, being led by Watamaraka Kadesi, had the advantage of cannons, which they used to destroy many slaves from a far distance. This violent and gruesome battle continued till Goddess Ma, in the body of widowed mistress Ninavanu, stood in the center of the battle and ordered the killing to stop. Watamaraka Kadesi was seen with fear in her eyes at witnessing the presence of Goddess Ma, and she walked away, and thus the battle stopped. In a separate conversation between Ninavonu Ma, Lumukanda, and Luluma Kadesi, it was shared that the real battle will need to take place between Watamaraka on the side of evil and Goddess Ma on the side of good, to decide who would take over the world. Goddess Ma also unfortunately shared that Lumukanda would be a traitor and assist the side of evil. 2 days later, Wild Huntress emerged. She was an albino with violet hair and referred to herself as the Evening Star. She led a mighty troop on a mission to destroy the city and free the captured slaves. It appeared that she was daughter of the Strange Ones, and she sought revenge against the city of the Strange Ones, as her own parents had cast her out on basis of being an albino. Lubo, Lumukanda's slave friend, also emerged having escaped slavery. He now was the leader of a large troop of slaves who had escaped. The Wild Huntress and Lubo thus joined forces to fight and overthrow the city of the Strange Ones. In response to this, the Strange Ones killed any black one they could get hold of, regardless of whether loyal or not. Some exceptions were also seen. As some, however, Strange Ones protected their loyal slaves. Such battles continued, and in time, Watamaraka got tired of pretending to be the Empress Kadesi, and she left their world. Lumukanda's betrayal took place first as a tempting voice, luring him away from Luluma and Goddess Ma. His conscience told him to not follow this voice, but he ended up following the voice and was very passionately lured by the evil Watamaraka and enticed passionately till he found himself having said he'd do anything for Watamaraka. Watamaraka then immediately maximized on these words and ordered him to collect and bring from Goddess Ma the necklace of life and the mucha of fertility from Ninavanu Ma's neck and hips. This Lumukanda obeyed and thus betrayed Goddess Ma in favor of Watamaraka. Later, Empress Kadesi's soul was returned to her rightful body, and yet Luluma's body died as her soul could not return to it. Also, the battle between Watamaraka and Goddess Ma was never settled, and instead it was observed that the forces of good and evil may be at play simultaneously in the world till the end of time. Having met the Wild Huntress and having learned that she is the daughter of Empress Kadesi and the emperor which Kadesi killed to secure the throne, and that this Wild Huntress deeply wanted to destroy Kadesi as equally as they did and was furthermore equipped with useful insider information to aid the destruction of the Strange Ones, Lumukanda and Lubo decided to unite forces with the Wild Huntress's people to the destruction of the city. They worked night and day in digging an underground tunnel that led them to the city. They also carried some cannons in this tunnel. The battle began and became very heated, and thousands from all camps were destroyed. In the end, the slaves won, and the city of the Strange Ones was brought to utter and complete destruction. The Wild Huntress and Odu, the older slave, also lost their lives in this battle. Lubo emerged as a leader amongst the black ones and established the Lunda people, they that increase. This people flourished and spread like wildflowers. It is believed that certain generations of the Lunda people exist even today. A month later, Lumukanda had a dream of a tree with spider roots and which walked like a spider or a crab. The tree identified itself as the tree of life and declared punishment to Lumukanda for having meddled with his two wives or with its two wives, Watamaraka and Goddess Ma. From then on, Lumukanda was a blind war god.